Good Sunday evening, and welcome to Favorite Allies. We're short a couple of players, and in respect of that, I'd like to introduce something that we're referring to as the Embers Only Lounge, where we can sit down and talk through some questions that we have about some of the characters, the choices that I've made, and a chance for the players to ask me things that, you know, perhaps are lower stakes or not as big a deal to reveal outside of the game and kind of get some more context. Obviously, some of the players I live with, so we have a lot of shared context, but the others I do not. And it's actually a really great opportunity just for me to like find out where people's heads are, what they'd like to do with their characters, or how they've kind of like felt about some of the things that have happened. Um, so I'm going to ask a few questions, but I actually want to take a moment and just check in with everybody. We'll go around. You all just had this wild encounter with a hag that you went out of your way to have. Um, just in general, how are you feeling coming out of that encounter? I'll start with Colin because you're at the top left of our Hollywood squares.
On a personal level, or like, is this for the character?
I mean, either, honestly.
Hmm. I mean, I live for the lore, so finding out more info about some of the characters that like Kamishava's had one scene where we've actually spoken with Kamishava, or someone has on like the stream kind of thing. Um, and finding out more about that individual is going to be interesting. So hearing that like Kamishava did actually come to the grandmother and try to steal from the grandmother and apparently failed. I think it was failed but got everything she wanted is interesting. And I'm very curious to find more about that out eventually. But um yeah, it was fun. I think for Elias at the very least, he comes out of that with the knowledge. I honestly don't think that he judges his grandmother much for the choice that she made, not just to leave, but like the idea of poisoning your rivals to kind of possibly get a lead in on this position. He just sort of takes that as like, oh yeah, this is how the politics of these places are going to work. This is just how politics are done. And not just here, but like also Lug and everywhere else. So that's just sort of assumed. But he keeps finding out more and more that is interesting about the Latonin stuff. And I don't think it has much of an impact on him, but I'm interested to see what it's going to be like when he shares that with his sister because she had a much stronger reaction to the revelation that like the Latonins had all been murdered effectively by Kamishava's like the other heads and stuff like that. Um and I'm very curious how that conversation is going to go and how the resolution to that arc is basically going to end up. So that'll be fun.
Okay. Let's go counterclockwise. Jamie, Tosha.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a player, I thought the way you kind of introduced it where we were all separated was super interesting because I was curious going into it like how that was going to play out, like how we were all going to be interacting with each other in the hag and if anyone was going to be like jumping in to be like no, don't sacrifice that or like no, don't say that, and how like that interaction was going to go. So I thought it was really interesting that everyone kind of had their own individual say and kind of what people did. It was on them, sort of like how much they asked and how much they gave, without like anyone else being involved in that. And then yeah, I think from Tosha's perspective, ever since we talked to the Great Oak, I had been kind of turning around in my mind, like, what would Tosha give up? Because I know they feel like an urgency to find this information. So, like, I know they'll give something, but I also didn't want it to be, if I gave something big, I wanted it to have like meaning and significance in the story and not just be like, oh, I sacrifice an arm. Like, I wanted something like symbolic or like some other meaning behind it that I think would make sense to Tosha. Um, and with like all the people in their mind, like they would absolutely never give like a memory or like, a piece of themselves in the sense of like something deeper, like their memories or power or like something like that. And they're also never, I've definitely played other characters where like maybe they would try to con the witch and like that's just like not Tosha's way. So I knew it was going to be something earnest that they would give up. And I think it just, with what happened to Olenna and the guilt they feel for that, it just seemed poetic. And so I had already like mentioned that to Nate ahead of time because I was like, this is pretty major and I don't want it to like break the game or like what we're able to do as a party, but like here's what I'm thinking of offering. So just a heads up. Um so so yeah, I think that was a little behind the scenes of that. So I like knew I didn't know exactly. I thought the tunnel vision aspect of it was really cool, so I didn't know, that going into it. Because I kind of left that with Nate, exactly how that was gonna play out. Um, but I thought the information was very interesting. Um, like I think similar to what Colin shared, like learning about Kamishava and that she had been there and some stuff had gone down is really interesting. Getting the name of the elf friend um was huge, and I think, that's definitely a big point that Tosha's taking away. I think honestly, I as a player, and I think both Tosha to some extent, was a little bit surprised that that's what oh gosh, I'm blanking on her name. Sfafa had found out because I think they had kind of assumed like, oh, they found out something terrible about the Asher, or they found out like something that like broke their faith and made them like decide to like throw it away once they got the position of the bride. So I feel like it still leaves a lot of open questions of like it's kind of seems like Sfafa got what she wanted. So like in a way, so like why did she run? Like, is it just because she ended up killing her sister and that wasn't part of what she wanted to do? Or are there other like, I think I kind of assumed like, oh, the answer to this question will reveal, the mystery of whatever was going on with Sfafa. And I feel like it left a lot more questions um rather than revealing that. And it also like I think Tosha was kind of dreading or expecting like some kind of terrible secret about the Asher is going to come out that will, make all their faith kind of wasted. And like that didn't happen either. So I think that was just interesting.
I mean, hags are known for nothing if not being straightforward.
Um, just to double check, if I'm remembering correctly, it was something along the lines of like very specifically, the Asher is no savior, and like the whole vibe from the grandmother of the mountains. So that, and coupled with whatever Svafa learned during the ascension ceremony, probably would have definitely been a big impact. I'm curious to see what that's going to be when we get to that.
Molly, Mama.
Uh, Mama's interesting because of her time as a mister, and that's like that taking care of people and like a sense of community. I think coming in, having heard that the prices are pretty steep. M- I was more thinking that Mama would just pretty much not buy because she's used to being able to haggle. She's used to being able to like it's a fair price, and this was not a fair price as far as she was concerned. And like even going to do the invocation, I mean, one of the things that Mama asked Tosha was just like, "Are you sure this is what you want to do? Or are you sure?" Because I think it was a shocking thing. I mean, I think she thinks it's cool to hang out with a being that is older than she is, that's not actively trying to kill her at the time. So that's kind of neat. Um, if not for the passive perception, I think it would have been far more horrifying for her of not knowing, of watching people become like blood laundry. Um, was just kind of strange. The one thing that really caught her off guard, and I kind of loved it, was the image of her daughter. Because it's one of those things that will click for her later, if it ever does. Um,
Like she was so happy to see Olive that it didn't occur to her that that meant that Olive was at that table.
yeah. Well, and to see that Olive was alive. I mean, because it's not like they get to communicate pretty clearly. And once Olive left, like that was kind of, she's used to her community staying her community and family's family, and you get along or you don't. But like having this daughter who's out, the folks who leave don't come back often. Like the folks who start to fade often die, and so she kind of feels like she's one of the few. So to see all of and that reflection was like such a beautiful moment for her. And I think that her moment of seeing her daughter alive was maybe one of the things that surprised you the most, in the little interaction, because it was Olive's alive. And I think after the fact, she's going to be mad at Olive the way that she was mad, about the fact that, I mean, she loves the fact that she's got her tea leaves recipes and that she understands it now, but like she's furious, that Callie gave it up, and she's mad right now. Um,
Yeah. Uh,
at what cost? Like
right.
she didn't buy it wholesale.
Well, and also I think both as a player and depending on your character and your character's knowledge or thoughts on things like hags and boggles and whatnot, out in the swamp, um, it is. I think one of the things I really wanted to get across was you don't necessarily understand what you're offering or what they're asking for. Like we've seen that a little bit with Tosha, the like I want to see through your eyes thing from earlier on, um, and or see things from your point of view. I think was the way that it was framed. But like Tosha had no sense of what that actually meant. Callie offered up knowledge without understanding what that cost actually was. Now she's paid a high cost, but essentially your original quest is done.
Yeah.
You have the means and the recipe by which you can help Thorn. So
Yeah.
so what now
So
for Mama?
well, the problem with Mama is that she collects family, and so she also has to turn Thorn into a tree. Well, there's no place to plant it that is secure in the area where she is. So she would essentially need to go back. Like she might trust Farron with it. She might trust Farron to watch Thorn and to encourage the trees. Um, but it's not really an answer of why this is and why this happens. And at this point, she's also just mad of people being mean and being mean and like being greedy, and it makes her mad. And so now she has these people she has to watch over because she's taking care of Thorn. Great. Her kids are old enough. Fine. She never liked her sister-in-law anyway. So it's one of those things where she's like, now I have this little adopted family, and one of my weird little adopted children is turning himself into some sort of like cross between a can opener and a cyborg, and she can't leave them now.
Um, I want to I want to give you a chance to just sort of popcorn. So like I asked you a question, so you can ask someone a question, and then they get to ask the next question. So we'll just go through a couple rounds of that.
Okay, so Jamie, one of the questions that I have for you, so like best case scenario happens in this ascension, what does Tosha imagine for herself if all of that works out? Like best case scenario. Like I know what mine is for the tea leaves. Like what is best case scenario for Tosha?
I mean, I don't know that Tosha fully knows, to be honest. Like, I think for Tosha, best case scenario is I get to talk to the Asher and ask all the questions that I have and really learn, like, what is this power that I have? And what, like, why have you been using me in this way all my life? And two, like, what are your motivations? Like, what do you what are you trying to enact on this earth, and like is this something I can believe in, continue to believe in, or have I like wasted my whole life in pursuit of something that is false or is, you know, trying to like ruin this place and isn't about balance but is about destruction and something else. So I think like that's really what's mainly in their mind. And then I think another secondary goal that's come up is I mean, I think Tosha's very young, so they're like 18 years old. So they're like very naive and very, I don't think they recognize the privilege they have or the level to which like they are a politician and involved in politics. So I think to them they're like all of this shit where people are like poisoning each other and killing each other and like doing all these things for power, like that has no place in a religious ceremony, and it should be about like should purely be about the religious like purpose of this. And so all these machinations and people, going in and killing everyone so that there's only one, like that's wrong. And that is not as is intended by the religious like code itself or what the Asher wants. So I want to get rid of all of that shit. And it should just be about, that person and their conversation with the Asher that determines if they're the bride or not. So I think that's like a secondary goal where they want to change it and make it more purely about the religion, even though I think me as a player, Jamie, is like, that's totally false. And that's like never gonna happen, and that's never been what it's about. But I think that's what Tosha wants and is feeling too. So I think at the end of the day, like a lot of it depends on, how are all the individuals in that ceremony going to interact? Are they going to like have to fight people to like literally stop them from killing other people in the ceremony? And how is their conversation with the Asher going to go? Like, is it going to turn into a like, I need to fight against the Asher or like stop someone from becoming a bride because I've decided this entity is just like, evil? Or does it turn into I'm ready to like recommit to this deity in a way that I feel like I have more like agency or choice in than I've had in the past? So I think like that's kind of, to my thinking, like the directions of it, but I don't think that they really have a clear like, here's what I want exactly, and I know what this is going to look like at the end. Like, I don't even think they know. They just like want answers.
Do they even have like a concept of what's going to happen, like of anything that could be after the ceremony?
I mean, I think they absolutely do not want to be the bride. I guess that's another thing, is they're like, I will refuse that position. Like, even if I decide the Asher is, ultimately like worth still worshiping, like I don't want to be that person. I've given up too much of my life already. And like I don't want to play into my mother's hands of whatever she's been trying to engineer my whole life, so like absolutely not. So but I don't think that they've really let themselves think past that, of all the implications and political upheaval and like a lot of potentially like very bad things that could happen. I think they're just like on this like quest for like capital T truth, even if it is like very kind of ruinous for anything else. Yeah, I have a question for Colin. Um, I'm just curious because I know Elias like came from Lug and didn't have a lot of context about like Bastion and probably like had a lot of like thoughts or assumptions or feelings about Bastion that he hasn't shared with Tosha. Um, and then now he, has learned more about stuff with his family and has actually like been to Bastion. So I'm curious to know like what did he think about the North and Bastion and all of that like going into things and like what has changed or how has his perspective changed on that if at all since like getting to know like Tosha and Derek that are like from there more and also like actually visiting the place himself and learning more about his family's history there.
I think there's a mix of things, and part of it is that there is a part of his mind that is taking all this info in and filing it away to be used if he has to stay. In that, if, for example, the order is, "Hey, congrats, you're now assigned to the new Bastion bureau we're setting up because you have contacts in the city, you have a reason to be here. Great, you're here permanently. Good job." Great, fun, awesome. But at the same time, like he is understanding that that's a possibility, and or that he might need to pretend to be someone who is like native to the area, and he's taking a lot of that in with the attitude of like, this place is different. It's not necessarily worse. It's not necessarily bad in a lot of ways. There are definitely bad aspects to it, and he's not a huge fan of the like all-encompassing religion, but that's mostly because he's from Lug and he personally isn't very religious. But I think he sees that primarily as a weakness and something that can be used against the people there. Not necessarily in a like, I'm gonna become the Asher and we're going or the Asher's bride or whatever. We're going to change. No, it's just like, if people respond very predictably to their religious focus, that means that now that there's an easy way to either manipulate them or to manipulate that kind of stuff. Um, for a lot of it, I think just amuses him, honestly, in the like his grandmother turning out to have been someone who was a major player in this city in terms of its politics for at least a brief time is uh honestly, I think if you asked him, he would describe it as more of an annoyance than anything else. Like it's an opportunity, but at the same time, for him personally, what I had like written for him for a backstory is that he's here for work. Like he was told to come here and do a job. He didn't come up here for a personal reason, and there was like a detached element to that sort of like was his motivation for coming here. Like it's money, it's career, and those are all personal things, but at the same time it's not like I need to find this out about me. So when that happens, he's now stuck up here with that, mentality of I did my job. I could technically go back, but I can't because I got this shit to deal with. And I can't leave my sister up here to deal with it all on her own and all that kind of stuff. Um I think he finds it interesting, but it takes a it's a chapter in the bigger interest that he's sort of developing, which is the interest in the old gods and the Jukin Empire and all that kind of stuff. Because it's all, he views this as all related to the Asher, and then the Asher as being related to the old gods and the Jukan Empire. And that is extremely interesting. This is a confirmed problem that is happening. This is something that if he comes back and says, hey, here is all this information I found out about the dead gods coming back and we're all gonna die, it's a big deal. And anything that sort of goes towards that is something that he can use to maybe not get assigned up here in Siberia for the rest of his life. So that's kind of his attitude. It's fine. It's interesting. There's cool parts of the city, but at the same, he would never want to live here. Be it because of the absence of creature comforts or because of just the whole vibe of the city as is. I think he'd love to investigate more here, but he definitely will be interested in leaving when the time comes. So for me, I have a bunch of questions, but a lot of the questions that I want to ask are in character things, and like the conversation about like with the question I had about like Mama and the demon web pits and stuff like that. And that's stuff that Elias wants to know in character. But outside of that, this is for Nate actually, I guess. Nate, is there anything? Because I also DM in other games and stuff like that, and you'll have that thing where you introduce a plot point that's either meant for or like an element that's meant for like a character to maybe like, here's a thing that you can get involved in if you want to. Like, I'm putting this thing up for people to play with. And like cats, when you get them a new toy, they go, ooh, there's a box. And then they climb in the box and they forget that that toy ever existed. I'm wondering if there's anything that we have like completely detoured around in that same kind of way, where like, you introduce something as like maybe a hook of like, oh, maybe they'll be interested in this. Maybe this is something that they're going to get involved in. And we just went, nope, and completely ignored it.
I think the first thing that comes to mind, there was nothing big like that. There were no big hooks that you just like looked at and you're like, hey, there's a hook, and then left. But way back in Kashir, there was one general store, the owner of which you later found out was a cultist. And you managed
Did we ever go in?
to literally never bother even knocking on the door.
I think we were told it was closed, and we all went, okay, and we just
Yeah.
completely ignored it.
And then you were like, who are, like, there's at least one cultist still around. Who are the players in town? Who could it be? And, like, I think I dropped the name, like, 2 more times. Like, oh, this is someone you haven't met. And, like, never once.
I like that. That's a fun element. That was the bit where we rolled. I don't remember who did it. It was either like maybe Lori or Molly. Somebody rolled, and we ended up with them like falling in a ravine at the last session.
Yes, that was they were because you also never dealt with the wolf problem. So when they ran off, I had at the end of that session, or at the end of season 1, and I'll do the same at the end of season 2. There's going to be like little things that your characters wouldn't necessarily know about. But that kind of like give either a little bit of closure or a little bit of foreshadowing to the folks playing the game of like, hey, here are some other things in the world that are going on. You never found that last cultist, so I knew that last cultist, like, either finding somewhere and either laying down their cultism and being like, okay, I need to lay low for a while, or what have you. There were 4 different outcomes for all of those different storylines, and depending on how high or low you rolled, you would get different outcomes. And man, that person did not have a good outcome. I don't remember how I had set those tables up at the moment, if it was either a 20 or a 1 was good for them versus good for you. But yeah, like, you either rolled really well or really poorly for that person. I don't remember which. And yeah, they fell down a ravine and were eaten by wolves. Like, but Yeah,
It was one of my few nat 20s.
I think a couple of the there were definitely some in the dungeons. There were definitely some sweet items that you all missed because you weren't completionists, and I don't blame you. Most of those dungeons, probably someone would have gotten, if not killed, severely injured,
Mhm.
going out of your way. Crit pathing those dungeons was probably the best thing that you could do, and the exception being the big that big keep, right? You at first I thought you were going to miss a ton of just like items and things like that. I honestly didn't know how you were going to find those leaves. I knew they were there. I knew that this was something that they would have on hand in the throne room, and I knew like the formal way. Like there's like a ritual to get them to come up. Um, and so like when Callie did something that was like close enough to that ritual, like yeah, so you I think like if you didn't 100% that place, you damn near did. You found
Mhm.
hints from other folks having been there before it rose, and uh, just so much magic shit that you found in there.
I
Um,
think the only thing that we didn't hit in the keep was that one chest that we knew was trapped in some way, shape, or form and had like gems or something in it.
Yes, there was that. There was the room with the shadows that you avoided.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that
There
one.
were a couple of things in there where the people had died that you could have picked up off their bodies.
Mm.
But yeah, as far as like, oh, I laid down a hook. I can't think of one that you absolutely missed. I can think of a couple of points where I expected you to ask more questions or seek clarity on a couple of things. So there are some things I expected you to know at this point that you don't. But at the same time, like that doesn't change the path of the game, and you didn't like miss a hook. It's just gonna blindside you eventually.
Mhm. Um, just because I'm thinking back and going through it, like that first dungeon that we did was basically just like we go in, there's the statue, we got the eyes, we go in, uh, dead dragon thing and all the undead. I don't think there was much deeper in there.
That was a very basic like
Mhm.
3 room dungeon. All
So
the
the
rest were a bit larger.
yeah.
Particularly the demon web pits. There were two paths that you didn't go down that
No.
had some pretty significant items, but I also made sure they weren't things that you like needed,
Mhm,
because you just needed to get to that altar, right?
mhm.
And clear it before bad things happened. Because I'm pretty sure I don't remember the name of the spider demon creature.
Lolth
Brood
or
mother.
Well, the brood mother, but she sent a spider demon.
right.
The
Yeah.
the dryad
No,
thing. No,
Driders were the things that you
wait.
were fighting, but it's a big demon thing, and it's like a CR-15. And if it had gotten there, somebody probably would have died.
Right. Yeah.
But like, yeah, no. So like, there were a few things like that. But again, like, oh, and I really expected Mama until you spoke recently about it. I really expected you to follow up on what you had seen in in there, because Mama had seen some pretty substantial strangeness. Um, but like when you explained it to Callie, I think um, uh, it made sense. So again, like it wasn't like a hook that you skipped or anything. I figured you'd eventually get to it. I was surprised that you didn't pursue it sooner.
Yeah.
Um, I'm actually going to bounce this all the way back to Colin. So Colin, Elias was designed kind of around like what you're playing through is not the V1 of what I foresaw this game as being. Um, there's still a lot of political stuff going on. You're just quite removed from it.
Mhm.
And you're kind of getting a lot of hints of it. And like in the future, either spending more time in Bastion or going to Chipscale or Lug or something like that. Obviously, the politics will become more important. But Elias was distinctly designed for a political campaign. So, just one as a player, like, how's that playing out for you? Because obviously he's capable in other ways. And then two, like, how's Elias doing? Just checking in how he's doing in the wilds, as this is not his ideal arena.
I like it. Like I mentioned, like when I built him, the whole idea was that like he's here for a job. So like there's no personal connection. There's no reason he has to be up here. It's just like he was told to do a thing, he's done, and we can do the other stuff. But the reason one of the reasons I did that was because it leaves it open of like this is a character who is inherently tied to this political element because he will get orders, and whether he follows those orders or not, that's going to like really impact whatever's going on. So you tell us it's a political game. I'm like, great, cool. How do I attach myself to this faction, and how do I make it so that there is that like you're going to get that interaction between like an internal or an external want or a need. And for a lot of that, the idea was that that motivation, the instigating factor for a lot of his stuff would come from the politics, and that has not happened much. But it's mostly because like we got sent up here, and this turned out to be like a bigger thing than it ended up being. Totally fine, and I've had a lot of fun like tying that back into things, and keeping that kind of going. But uh, 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 this is one of the like the drawbacks of 5e kind of as a system is that when you don't have magic, you are often limited in how you can interact with certain things. And I've seen posts where people are talking about like, I'm a fighter and we're doing all this like political and social interaction stuff. I don't have any spells. What do I do? And people trying to come up with ideas of like, hey, you are the fighter. Challenge people to duels. If they do it, great. You get to do your combat stuff. And if they don't do it, awesome. You've intimidated them and you have shown that they're dishonorable and you can do all this other kind of stuff. But that it does rely a lot on like you coming up with those ideas. And part of the reason why I went with the thief, in addition to me liking the old version of it as opposed to like what they're working on now, um, you have access to those items. And while caltrops or like poison or the ball bearings or whatever are not going to be things that are remarkably helpful against the dragon or the demon or whatever, they are going to be incredibly helpful against people. And the random guard that you find or this that, the other thing. And I've had like a bunch of little ideas of stuff that I want to do. I still got manacles in my bag of like I wanted at some point I was like, okay, this is the plan. We'll get into a fight with a person and we'll sneak up behind them and I'll have to like lock their ankle to something so that they're restrained and everybody else can get them. Or like the other idea I had that I don't know if it'll ever happen because of just what it is, but like I'm imagining a set piece like you're on a wall or a cliff or something, and the ability to take a grappling hook, hook it in someone's belt or something, and then jump off the cliff. So your full weight just goes whoosh, and you can feel them like fall. And then when you are a person who has spider climb or something like that, you can more easily get back up. Or worse comes to worse, you maybe latch it to a barrel and kick that off the wall. You do whatever that bit is from all those action movies where the person steps in a big bit of rope and you kick the thing and they go flying.
Right, Wilhelm scream.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm always looking for set pieces of like, oh, there's a chandelier. I can cut the chandelier. We can fall that on people, or we can do this, that, other thing. And I like that element of it. I think that's fun. It just requires work. And you've put in that work, which I appreciate. Like you keep giving me fun things to play with. I made jokes about like Vancian spellcasting where I have to prepare all my stuff ahead of time. But the box is really fun, and some of the other stuff that we found, and you've been really nice about letting me kind of like make things up on the fly or try to like come up with ideas. So I appreciate that a lot. And it's been a little bit of a twist in terms of what I initially had planned for the character, but I don't have any issues with it. It just means that like I'm curious where this is gonna go. Like when we get back to the Asher, or back to Bastion, and we do the Ascension ceremony, there's a political element there that'll come up after we do the Ascension ceremony. And however that goes, that like if there are arcs to a story, I am assuming that is That is the end of an arc. Whatever that's going to be, it's going to be a period. And then you have whatever comes after that. And I'm assuming that moment is going to be something that is at the very least going to be something that we have to kind of like figure out where we're going to go from here. Or it's going to give us information that lets us figure out where we're going next, all that kind of stuff. So I have no idea where it's going to go from there. It could be that we lean into like, we got to unite the people, we got to unite the various kingdoms to rise, or completely differently, we go, fuck this shit, we're out. Let's find the elf friend, and maybe they will keep some of us alive. That sounds like a good idea. Hey, we're all in this elf book. Let's find the elf friend and be like, look, these families, they stay. That includes the adopted children and my family and like all this stuff. We're good. And yeah, they're okay, they're done. We give up. So I don't know how that's going to go, but I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Tiny tech on question. Regarding the Vancian magic approach, how jazzed are you that you basically have a bottomless well of wyvern poison?
Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
You asked that question, and I was like, "There's literally no reason for me to deny you that. I told you exactly how this works, and that sounds correct."
I haven't had a chance to do this much, and part of the reason is because it's very rarely viable. Because in any situation, you have limited action economy. And you've got like an action to do something, you got a bonus action to do something, and as a rogue, if I can hit with a sneak attack, preferably if I have advantage or something, if I get a crit, that's a lot of damage. And even if I don't, it's still a decent chunk of damage on one hit. But that means I have to do that hit. And that means that if I'm not doing the damage, it may take longer for people may get hurt more, other things could happen. So I'm always trying to figure out like what is the good use for the bonus action? Is it to hide? Is it to do this? Is it to do that? But in situations where there's no way for me to get like advantage or there's nothing I can do and I may never ever get sneak attack, that actually frees me up to do things. And I've had plans for this, I just haven't had an opportunity to do it. Where like I go to Callie and I'm like, great, bonus action, I'm gonna poison all your arrows. Here you go, you're better at this than me. And let her do that because that gives me a cool support thing that I can do in a moment where I can't do damage. So like that is one of the fun tools that I'm looking at of like things that I could do that would be fun. In the same way that like I kept trying to use the oil so that when Mama had a fire spell up and that would work on a creature, I could be like, all right, we're gonna oil him up, and Mama's thing does extra damage, and we can like, I like the idea of combos. So I was always trying to figure out like how can I support somebody else with this so that their thing is even more impactful. So the wyvern poison is gonna be fun, especially if I can get to poison some of Callie's arrows. I guess I have to ask the question now. For you, Jamie, how how confident are you that we can get through this ascension ceremony without it going really, really, really bad? Mostly because of like Olenna. And because I'm kind of good with any result that doesn't end with like my sister dying and preferably Tosha dying. Like we're trying to avoid like the death of the known people things. But you have even more of a connection because there's Olenna, there's Raminari, there's yourself. Hopefully there's some sort of connection to Elias. You don't want him to horribly die, but like at the same time, you know, you're in a harder position than Elias is because Elias 100% would write off Olenna if it came down to it. And I get the feeling that's not something that is as appealing to you or your character.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be really interesting when we get back to Bastion because, you know, essentially Tosha wants to have a conversation with everyone who's known who's going to be there, like everyone you mentioned, essentially, as well as your sister, and try to have a come to Jesus of like, we need to stand together. we can't turn against one another and just like slay everyone in this place for the sake of power. And if we can ally together and stand strong and protect each other, like whatever decision is made about the bride should be between the Asher and that person. And like I'm willing to protect whoever that person is and anyone else from anyone who's like aggressing. And so I think something that's an unknown quantity for me and for Tosha is that like Tosha has not really spoken to Olenna since the accident happened. Like because Olenna was essentially like, get away from me, like I don't want to have contact with you anymore. Tosha respected that and did not ever approach her or try to talk to her again. And so I think, you know, Tosha doesn't really know. Tosha knew Olenna very well for a period of time, and they were extremely close, but they don't really know what's going through Olenna's head now and like what her priorities are now and how far she's willing to go with relation to all of this. So I think like that conversation will tell a lot. Um and also just like a little backstory stuff. I had kind of selected because I think in character generation Nate had given us some stuff of like, choose someone significant, and so I had selected the rival kind of relationship because I thought that would be interesting. I thought it made sense given the political like standing of Tosha and their family. And so I came up with the like sort of initial storyline of like, okay, I know Tosha has this reticence about their power. It would make sense that the power had hurt someone they cared about in the past that makes them like feel this conflicting relationship with it. Because if it's always just been good, then like they wouldn't really care. Um, and so I had kind of worked it out to that level of like there was a friend or someone like very close to Tosha that they loved a lot that they hurt, and then it created this rift, and now they're kind of both vying for this bride position essentially, even though that's not something Tosha wants per se. Like they are rivals in that sense. And so I think it'll be really interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. Like the stakes are pretty high for Tosha, and that they don't want anyone to die that's going in there, and I think they're willing to sacrifice quite a lot to try to make sure that no one else dies or nothing bad happens to anyone else. But I think at the same time, if everyone agrees, because I think the two wild cards, at least in my mind, are Olenna and your sister. Like they're the ones who I feel like would potentially just like be like, fuck it, fuck these other people, like I don't really care and I'm willing to like, do whatever it takes kind of thing. Like I don't think Raminari is just there because she feels like she has to be there. And I know like, well, I Tosha thinks that Elias won't do anything, like that to try to make a power grab, and like they don't even want the bride role. So I think those are the two people where it's like I don't know what their agendas are going to be and what they're going to do ultimately. um and so I think Tosha's hoping that like Elias will be able to somehow influence his sister's perspective on that. And I think Tosha's hoping that Olenna will. I think that's also why they gave up so much in the Hag conversation, is they're like, Olenna hates me and has every reason to be like, fuck this, I'm taking what I want.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can I provide her that is like a strong enough reason to stand with us instead of against us in this scenario? But I think Tosha's definitely feeling a lot of difficulty in like, if it comes down to it, am I going to have to fight and potentially like kill my friend?
Mhm.
over this if they're gonna go nuclear and try to like take everyone out.
Yeah, I'm I'm really curious about what that final lineup of people going in is going to be because you and Nate have sort of posited that like there could be other people that we don't know about yet. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I have a question for Mama. Um, I think based on what we learned from the hag the last time, it seems kind of like these like ancient ones, these spirits, and also the old gods are deeply tied to like this world and the natural realm and everything. But it also seems like not all of them, obviously, but at least many of them that we've so far interacted with have kind of a antagonistic relationship to like all the mortals here, you know, where they're like, this was a mistake of history that you're here, and like the old gods, as far as we know, were, you know, trying to destroy you know, or we're fighting with these elves from the Jukut Empire. So I'm curious, since Mama is, you know, a druid and is so tied to like the natural forces in this world, but these forces also seem to be like fuck all the mortal beings to some extent, like kind of how she, if those are like things she already sort of like knew about, or if she doesn't think about it in that way, or how she kind of squares that, the sense that like she wants to protect and like help people so often, but then these forces that she in theory would be pretty aligned with or feel a connection to seem to be antagonistic to that sort of desire that she has.
Well, I think the way she would view it, at least kind of the way that when I reason through with what who she is, like she knows that things that can be beneficial can also be um, incredibly devastating. And one of the things um, that she got to say to the grandmother of the mountain was just that pretty much like these young ones don't understand that the mountain gives and takes. Something along those lines of like that nature gives, but it is hungry as well. Um, and I think that that's something that she is used to, but because she loves people, I think that's where she struggles with this kind of like force of old god nature, because the moon is an easy thing to love for its distance. Um, to worship the moon goddess because there's silvery light, you're not going to get a sunburn. You might get some waves. You might get the tides. Um, but that's not the kinship she feels. That's not why I mean, she worships the moon because I feel like that's how she wants to be, but that's not who she is. She's closer to the mountain. And she can be just as destructive. Because we haven't really met a lot of her family yet. And as loving and as kind as she is, she knows how capable she is of hurting. I mean, heat metal. So it's there. I feel like that dichotomy has to be there. Like it would she wishes she could be still and serene and kind and calm like Callie is a lot of the time, which is why she feels really drawn. I mean that Callie just kind of feels like another one, like just could have been any of my kids' friends growing up kind of thing. But like Callie kind of has that still surface, and Mama does not. She's all howling wind and bluster and craggy face and everything. And so I think she understands that, but whether or not she accepts it is something totally different. I do have a question for Nate because God, Colin, I almost called you Elias. Um, Colin asked about like what kind of things we pretty much almost fucked up. But what are the things, or are there things that we took in a totally different direction but worked out better than you thought they could have?
There have been a couple. Um, One, I am very permissive with magic items and gear. I think that, and part of that is I don't necessarily give you things that are optimized for your party. For example, you have a really like amazing longsword, and technically the ranger can use it in the way that rangers could use any weapon, basically. Um, but no one in your party is like a Dark Souls like sword and board character that's like really like gonna go ham with a longsword. It's a cool weapon and it will definitely come in handy when you need it. Um, but it's just a tool, and so I think that you have surprised me a few times as a party, like what you can do with the tools that I give you. Um, I also, I think the time I got completely blindsided was when I just did not realize the damage output of your party, in particular your ranger, when you face down essentially the first boss in the public square. You were going to face him down a couple of times. I had other places that he was going to show up at the altars while you were dealing with other things. Certainly, if you had tried to sneak into the Demon Web Pits altar, you would have either had to go through him or he may have come up behind you while you were there. He was going to be an ongoing thorn in your side until you captured him, like debased him, and he essentially committed suicide to like save his honor. Um, like that was yeah, no, that changed a lot. Like I was scrambling a bit in Kashir for a few things. I also like got reminders that you're not the other party that I'm DMing for. That's like 4 levels higher than you are right now. So like it was probably fine that you didn't have like an 8th level paladin harrying you while you were going through some of those trying areas. Um, but yeah, definitely like that one caught me off guard. I'm trying to remember. There was someone that you talked to and you brought something up that I hadn't anticipated. We've been playing for like the better part of a year, so like some of it I don't quite remember as clearly, but I think maybe it was a conversation you had with Volstott back in Kashir. You had like asked something that I totally didn't expect, and I was like, there's no reason he wouldn't have an answer to that. Um, and I think most recently, the big one was Callie's sacrifice. There was a better than even odds chance that you couldn't decipher everything that from that book when you went to the mountain temple. There was like a whole quest line that I had for you to get that, and I was like, like I'm not going to deny the sacrifice, and like there's certainly this mother of the mountain has the capability to give you that knowledge. So if Callie was willing to sacrifice knowledge, even if she didn't quite understand what she was giving up, um, she shortcut you quite a bit to just like give you that. And I thought about it later and I was like, there are other ways that I could have played that and made it like still more dynamic, but also like the player wanted to give something in order to get something and had a very specific ask, and I just thought it was a really good opportunity to reward that. But yeah, no, that I didn't expect that, and then when it happened, I was like, I guess this is where we're at now. Um, oh, yeah, the other one again. This was more you shortcutting than going off in left field. But the water walk through the swamp. Um, there was a whole encounter with like shit that drops and grabs you from like the treetops while you're like dealing with 2 giant gators and like bugs, and it was really nasty. I was actually a little concerned but really excited for that fight, and then you all just sprinted past it and I was like, there's literally no reason to stop you. Like you did the things you needed to do. to avoid this. So cool. Good talk. That one can go in the bin.
I would say I'm sorry, but I'm not.
No, you shouldn't be. I think someone might have died.
No.
It was definitely there were a lot of enemies and there was a lot going on. And the giant alligators are rough. I think they're CR7s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're rough.
Um, see, I had one for Mama, but you kind of touched on it, and I kind of want to let it play out in game about how Mama feels about how you or how Mama feels about Callie's sacrifice. I think we'll wait and let that one play out in game. Um, but Jamie, uh, for Tosha, we've talked off and on for a long time now about Bastion and where Tosha comes from. How was it actually getting to experience Bastion and seeing the city that Tosha was raised in and the like definitely not evil necromancy kind of folks who like run the city?
I mean, I think it was really fun. Um, I had a great time with it. I really like the like socialist dynamic, but then also the creepy necromancer dynamic. So it's just like an interesting mixture of things. I think we had kind of talked about the oh god, I'll have to look at my notes. I'm like completely blanking on their names now. But what
The
Olin
pale
is.
ritualists.
Yeah, but I think like the first time you gave a description of them, I thought like that was just super cool. Um and yeah, I mean going to your hometown, I think in D&D is always such a like iconic thing because I think it gives the other players such a different understanding of like your character because they get to just like see, you know, what it was actually like for you to some degree. Um and so I also really enjoyed just the fact that we had talked about things beforehand and, you know, I had given input on certain things from Tosha's experience and I was able to kind of explain things to people, you know, like as they were asking about stuff as we were going through. I think the conversation with Kamishava was also just like really interesting because again that was a character we had like talked about a lot but that I as Tosha in game had not like really gotten to interact with and see. And she was just like pretty intimidating and like sort of terrifying as I had kind of anticipated or thought of in my mind. Um and I think yeah, I thought I really enjoyed it and I'm excited to go back even as like, you know, scary I think as it will be with everything going on with the Ascension and how everyone's going to react. I thought talking to the brides was super cool. And that was something we had discussed but just like oh that everyone the ex-brides or like, you know, former brides however you want to call it that are still kind of also the brides but not the acting brides and just like their history with things and their like relationship to Kamishava and their relationship to me. So I think just like seeing a lot of those relationships play out was something that was really cool as well. And I guess getting that feedback as Tosha from like, oh, this is how they're seeing me. Or like because I think for them anyway, for a long time they've kind of been equated with Kamishava in a certain sense. Um, or like seen as an extension of Kamishava in a way. And so I think it was really cool to hear some people like the former brides that Tosha respects a lot, you know, say like, oh, you're different from her and you're like trying to do something else and just like having someone else in the society that they come from kind of like validating that I think was really like huge for Tosha and was kind of like I'm on the right track with these like new friends that I'm traveling with, and I'm doing what I want to be doing. And other people are like seeing that. So I thought that was just a really cool like moment or interaction with those characters that I liked a lot as well. And I know we've touched on Elena before too, but yeah, that was just like super cool to hear the description of her and kind of like see what she had become. Both me as the character and then also just like Tosha kind of seeing her for the first time in a long time. And of course, like Derek's interaction at the party, like automatically was like, oh god, we have to like talk to and fuck with this person, and just Tosha being in the corner like, oh, could you literally like mess with anyone else, please? Was pretty great. Ooh, it's me now.